Hey guys, good afternoon. If you stuck around through parts 1 through 3, I just want to say thank you. Hope this series have been helpful to the new autocrossers. Last time we were talking about wheel and tire setup. So logically for me, the next one I'm going to move on to is suspension. Don't mean to keep being a broken record, but just know that most of the good stuff, bushings, coilovers, already show up in street touring. So by the time you get to prepare or SM, you want to have all these things ironed out already. I started out with the OEM KYBs. Let's get some light in there. When I first bought the car, it had 93,000 miles, a lot of rust, and it was blown. So sometimes when driving this car, when I hit bumps, I would hear a popping noise on the right side. I quickly replaced it with MR Bilsteins off of the forum. At the same time, I bought the Swift lowering springs. The combo I just mentioned is a well-known setup for a lot of the track guys. I ran it for several years until I got the wider wheels and tires, at which point I started getting some popping on the front right again. It seems like the Bilstein's blown out. I had gotten them rebuilt just a few years before, but unless you match the spring rates of the lowering springs, it's just outside of the operating range. So I wasn't too upset about that, but that was my reason for getting coilovers, because I was getting a lot of rub on this front fender and it was chewing up my brand new tires really quickly. Just so you know, they no longer make the MR Bilsteins. It's discontinued. I'm not even sure if that company still does the revalve jobs on those. I believe a lot of people now opt for the Bilstein HD, and if you're still going for the Swift Spec R lowering springs, you could get those revalved to match those spring rates. I went with 10K front, 12K rear. Got these Öhlins custom valved as well to match that. The higher rear spring rate is due to this multi-link suspension in the back. The Evo X doesn't have this, so this is unique to the CT9A. Prior to the coilovers, I was running Camber caster plates, mostly in an attempt to get the wider tires and wheels to fit. Unfortunately, with the stock suspension, it still didn't work. I didn't have too much success with the caster adjustment. It shifts the mounting further back for more positive caster, but for me, that just created more issues with steering, especially at full lock. The spring rate of the Öhlins are a lot higher than your typical lowering springs, so I feel like that helped a lot with that tire rub. For me, that solved the problem. Currently, I just have the default setup in terms of preload and height. I have not gotten a chance to corner balance the car yet due to COVID. It was either 20 or 30 adjustments from full stiff to full soft. On the street, I'm running 10 clicks from full stiff. During autocross days, I increased the stiffness of the front by 6 clicks and the rear by 2. This is not set in stone. Every setup is going to be different depending on your tire sizes, how much air you're running in the tire, and so forth. That's just what I'm trying at the moment. So this retains the stock eccentric bolt. I have it currently pointing out, which is -2. If you swap it to -1, it's possible, but then you'll just have to have more camber adjustment on the top plate here. There's no right or wrong. I know some people swap it to -1 to get more clearance between the edge of the tire and this assembly here. Again, every car's setup is a little different. You might have very tight fitment that requires some adjustments here and there. It really is trial and error. If you decide to run with stock suspension, I would highly recommend that you keep that eccentric bolt on top facing outside for -2 camber. That way you maximize the grip with the stock setup. For the rear, you could try -1 camber, and for beginners, I would highly suggest you stick with 0 toe all around until you get more used to the car and how it handles. There's nothing wrong with running a normal strut assembly. For many years I ran without coilovers just fine, and if you're just doing this for fun, it might just be out of the price range. In my case, if it wasn't for the tires and wheels not fitting, I think I would have still been on the Bilsteins and the lowering springs. So it is nice to have. There's a lot of other coilover setups that don't work as well as the Bilstein and Swift Spec R combo. That's expected because you have budget coilovers, you have mid-range, and you have the really high end. I think I would consider the Öhlins DFV somewhere in the middle. And it works really well on both autocross and street. On street driving, it's even more comfortable than the Bilsteins. And that's at 10 clicks, not even on full soft. So it definitely is a nice ride, and I think that's why a lot of people recommend these. So again, for a casual autocrosser or open class, it's really up to you if you want to spend the money on coilovers. I would definitely get the tire and wheel setup ironed out first. I found a bigger improvement in lap times from those than the coilovers. Don't forget that with coilovers, especially the ones that have 2 or 3-way adjustments, that just adds more variables that you have to tinker around with. And as a beginner especially, sometimes you just want to focus on driving. If you make too many changes at once, you're not going to know what changed what. Do note that if you get coilovers, adjustable ones, you're going to have to make a hole in this liner for the adjustment knob. So I had to peel off both liners here and Dremel a hole out of it. For some that's not really acceptable, but for me I want an easy adjustment. So on lowered cars, the suspension geometry is changed. The relation of this control arm to the ground. To correct that, you get a roll center kit, RCK. It's a taller ball joint and a longer tie rod end in the back there. That'll correct the geometry, and you do need alignment after that. While we're down here, some people opt to change the bushings on the control arm, but from what I heard, you should leave the spherical ones alone. These from the factory work better than the aftermarket ones, whereas these are the ones that people usually opt to replace. I didn't do it because my control arm is seized due to the rust. If you did the front RCK kit, a lot of people will opt to do the rear Bumpsteer bushing. That's just the offset bushing that moves the toe arm in and out. Again, you'll have to get alignment if you change that. I have some poly bushings here. Again, anywhere where there's not a spherical one, that's OEM. And these are really more for getting the slop out of the suspension, especially on older cars with over 100,000 miles. If you wiggle them, you'll see a lot of play. So that's why a lot of people opt to change these. And here are 2 more, the rear mustache bar bushing and the rear sway bar bushings. These are all poly. Moving back to the front wheel well, for my brake setup, I am currently running Evo X calipers and rotors. My factory ones had a seized caliper slide. The brake pads wouldn't go in and out unless I hammered them in and out, which destroyed the material inside. I'm running Ferodo's 2500 as the brake pad. It fits both the Evo X and the 8 and 9 calipers, so that's a good thing. The rotor increased in size from 320, I believe, to 350 millimeters, and it is a notable difference. I feel like it stops much better, and for those who are doing high-speed track, some people have reported there's less fade. To do this mod, you need to remount the 2 I believe it was 12 millimeter holes and expand that to 14. It's not hard, but I would do it carefully because you're potentially messing with something that could fail, so just be aware of that. And I'm not even sure if this mod is legal in any class if you're doing SCCA. The brand of rotor I've been using for many years now is the Centric Blanks. There's a premium and there's a normal one. I have the normal one, and you could tell because it rusts in the middle, whereas the premium has like a black layer, and that one lasts a little bit longer. This rotor is cheap, and even the high-speed track guys use it. It's a throwaway, it's a consumable, and it works pretty well. I've never seen any failures personally from using this one. It's not a tooth piece, but again, this is a consumable for me, and the price is right. I'm running Modal 660 brake fluid. Seems like it absorbs moisture quicker than the OEM one, so you do have to bleed out the brakes more often. So unlike other cars where you start brake bleeding from the master cylinder back, this one has a unique sequence. You start on the passenger side, rear. There's two nipples on each side. You start outside, then inside. You then move to the front left, outside, inside. Driver's side, rear, outside, inside. And you finish on the passenger, again, outside nipple first, then the inside. And I could not get all the air out unless the car was running. No idea why, but some people think it has something to do with purging the air out the ABS lines, the module. So it worked better when I had a second person pumping the brakes inside. I'm not running stainless steel lines yet. That's kind of a subjective mod. Some people think that you get a better feel because the line's newer. I probably will upgrade it at some point, just for the heck of it. But just know the rubber, the OEM rubber is made to last a long time as well. So do your research and determine if that's worth the risk. Some people will say that the stainless steel needs to be replaced more often, and when it starts to fail, it'll fail abruptly, whereas rubber can expand. Again, you can share your thoughts down below. That's one of those debates that go on forever. In my car, I am running the factory sway bars and end links. I know a lot of people usually upgrade this first, so I want to mention it. This is usually the first mod that people do, especially if they're pairing it with the rear differential restack or upgrade. It's very common. I have yet to find a need to upgrade my sway bars, but a lot of people will get the adjustable 3-hole one in the back. They have varying thicknesses that you can choose from. The front sway bar that I'm showing here can also be upgraded, but it goes through the front subframe and is a bit more of a pain to install. So to recap this segment, you want to make sure that your existing suspension is working. Make sure your struts aren't blown or rusted out, as in my case. You want to make sure your brake pads have enough material left. Again, this is just some basic maintenance. Make sure that it's properly bled out. I don't know why, but these cars are very sensitive to air in the system. It feels like you'll know when there's air, because when you push on the pedal, you'll get a little bit of a spongy feel. Maybe I have a leak in there somewhere, but it just seems like that no matter what I do, I have to keep bleeding it out pretty often. There's nothing wrong with your typical strut assemblies with lowering springs. Aftermarket, it doesn't really matter. You can search online for the good brands. Bilstein and the Swift Spec R, again, is the known combo that works really well. If you have the money, you could do coilovers. You'll be introducing more variables that may affect your driving both good or bad. And yeah, the bushings. The bushings is really up to you, especially if your car has over 100,000 miles and you have some slop or movement in those places. You could opt for the poly bushings. I would do them all at the same time just to save labor if you're getting it professionally done. And that should be it for this segment. Thanks for watching.